Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a quick recap update around what went down last night during the Minneapolis Committee of the Whole meeting, where they talked largely about enrollment and finances. Heather, how are you doing this morning?
I'm well today. Thanks for asking. Well, last night was a short meeting, but kind of one that we've heard versions of over the last few years. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it was packed with a lot of information, but it's not necessarily new information. And so, yeah, let's go into it.
Yeah, so what we heard last night were two presentations, one on enrollment, and then the other presentation was on the financial state of our district and how declining enrollment affects the financial state of our district. And then the board had some questions to ask, and it was a pretty quick meeting overall. But anyway, do you want to kind of just talk a little bit about what we saw in the first presentation?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about declining enrollment and the trends that are happening. We know that this year Minneapolis Public Schools is down over 2,400 students from last year, which is a big drop. And that, as Heather said, it's very connected to our revenue for next year, in terms of how much money we'll have. And so, Minneapolis Public Schools is really going through kind of a tough time when it comes to enrollment. And part of the comprehensive district design was the hope that students would come back, they could improve programming, they could improve rigor, they could improve safety. And we heard a lot of conversation last night around perceptions of safety still being a problem. Programming and academic rigor, I guess, doesn't turn around in 6 months, essentially, is what the superintendent said. And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is we're going through this transition and implementation phase, and they're hoping that the enrollment drops will level off a little bit over the next couple of years. And at the same time, these enrollment drops aren't just solely because Minneapolis Public Schools isn't doing what they need to be doing. We know that students are leaving the city, not just the school, but like there are less students living in the city of Minneapolis, which changes, what the enrollment opportunity that students have in Minneapolis Public Schools. Then we also know that there's been a narrative that's been driven over the last several years around charter schools really being the group of schools that is eating up Minneapolis Public Schools potential enrollment. But now we know over the last few years, it's really been open enrollment where other districts have been recruiting students to go. And I thought a final kind of finding that was interesting, and not new information, but I think is always important to center, is we're losing our students of color. No matter like what type of narratives being pushed, how much anger there is that you're hearing about or reading on social media, like white families are staying largely in Minneapolis Public Schools. Like their student share percentage has gone up over the last 10 years, while every other group has gone down.
That's
And
right.
so part of that is because of the large drops in students of color that we're seeing. But white families are happy, essentially, but at least in terms of where they're choosing to enroll their students, they're happy with Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm sure they have concerns, as many parents do, but that's I thought those were some really important takeaways and highlights from at least the enrollment presentation.
And then, so like that hard conversation led to another hard conversation, which is where we'll talk a little bit more about like kind of slides of the night and that kind of thing, which was, so what does this declining enrollment mean for us financially as a district? And that's where we got into, a more somber realization of what's happening in Minneapolis public schools.
Yeah, and so I can share my slide of the night so I have two. Both of them are from the finance presentation, actually. Especially with everything going on in Minneapolis in terms of, the potential for a strike, what unions are asking for, everything like that. I think it is important to recognize where the district is saying their financial position is right now. And so you can look here and you can see in fiscal year 2021-2022, which is the school year that we're currently in, the budget shortfall last year was $58.9 million. So that was a projection for how much money that the district might be down. With the grant, the with the ESSER funding, the district it was able to cover that gap, and they didn't have to make any severe cuts. Um, this year, the gap is even larger. It's $97.2 million, and again, that's highly attributable to the 2,400 students that we have in Minneapolis Public Schools. The district is planning to use $75 million of the ESSER funding that came in to address these budget gaps, but that's or this budget shortfall, but that still leaves us $21.5 million short coming into next year. And so some people might ask, why can't we use more of the ESSER dollars? We know that there was like 150, $160 million that came into the district. Why can't we use more of that ESSER funding? Well, that's because we need to we need to save some of that money to solve some of these budget problems next year as well.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really well presented last night, and I think a really important thing that is happening. And on top of all of these conversations, what's also really clear is that Minneapolis Public Schools like cannot also continue to be underfunded, especially when it comes to special education, English language learners. Um, and so that was the second conversation that came up is some of the key pro forma findings. Just increasing enrollment in Minneapolis Public Schools isn't going to save our budget situation. Using more of the one-time grant dollars isn't going to help our long-term sustainability as a district. And we need the state and we need the federal government to step in and commit to their promises to help Minneapolis Public Schools provide a great education for our English language learners and our special education students. And so while yes, Minneapolis Public Schools definitely has work to do and they need to own, we heard a lot of board members also talk about the need for the state, the federal government, and the city to step up because they are losing students. And part of it, and I will say, part of that is attributable to the actions of Minneapolis Public Schools and the decisions that they have made. And some of it is out of their control, and there needs to be some level of support. And so we do need to fully fund our public schools, and we need to hold our schools accountable to making sure that they're educating our students properly. So I thought those were two really important conversations that were had last night around enrollment and finances, and I thought those were two slides that really clearly demonstrate kind of the picture that is our financial situation in Minneapolis Public Schools. And by the way, like, and you're going to go into this, so I don't want to jump the gun here a little bit, but I think it's important to recognize like this is information that has been available and shared since November of this year, right? And some of the cost structure conversation, the underfunding of special education and English language learners, like those comments, those topics have been things that Senior Officer Diop has brought up several times over the course of last several years. And so this is not the first time we're hearing this information, but it does feel really ominous going into this conversation around potentially a strike taking place in Minneapolis Public Schools and continuing concerns about the budget.
Yeah, we're in a really hard this is it's tough, and I think that the other thing that where I really love was like the sense of like we really aren't as a society and as a state reckoning with what we need to spend on education, and how we can share our values. And so I think, what you got a sense of like the sense of like the urban districts are going to suffer the consequences, for the lack of ability to reimagine systems or reimagine change or fully fund. And so yeah, it was a really heavy board meeting to really think about and to say. And so with it in mind, I guess what I want to say is like, are we starting with most valuable or do better?
You pick.
So I'll go first with my do better. I will say that board meetings, I've said this before, my do better moment is just communication from the district to parents. Robocalls and board meetings are not communication. They are telling things, but if families and community members don't understand what's happening and don't feel informed and don't see how this might affect their child's school, then we aren't communicating. And so again, I'll just go back to the fact that, like, we have a responsibility to make sure that families are engaged in these issues, and we all have a shared understanding of what's happening. And I just continually see our district fail to communicate that. Telling is not communicating.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my do better moment. What's yours?
So I think my do better moment is the fact that Senior Officer Diop had to present this information again. Like, this information was presented
Mhm.
in the November meeting and in the December meeting. And it's frustrating in terms of the pro forma and what was presented there. And it's frustrating that, like, still our city, and I think a lot of it is what you shared just right now in your do better moment, is that, like, telling is not communication. And but, like, it's frustrating that our city cannot grapple with the fact that, like, Minneapolis public schools do not have, like, the money to do, like, all the things that everyone wants them to do. And we have a real scenario where, like, cuts are going to need to be made. And that, they said last night that they're hoping that they can make those cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. Um, but there's a $21 million shortfall, and they've already done year after year after year cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. So we're going to get closer and closer and closer to this. And I think one of the issues that is, was brought up and mentioned last night, and is something that we've been focusing on, is around this issue of accessing teachers. And last
Mhm.
night they shared that, teachers are going, like, principals are going to make final decisions about their sites, and teachers are currently being informed and will have to be informed about whether they're being accessed and cut from their building by next Friday. Like, this isn't a made up thing. Like, they have a process and they have a budget reality that they have to adhere to. And so I think it's important for us as a city to recognize, like, our senior financial officer is brilliant and he's providing us with a lot of information. We need our media members, we need our school district communications teams, we need all of our institutions in Minneapolis to really understand, like, the financial position that the district is in right now. And that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be paid more. I'm not saying that. That doesn't mean
No, that's
that,
right.
like, those asks shouldn't be made. But that also, we also need to understand, like, cuts are imminent. And if we do value, for example, like we've been saying, teachers of color, like, then we need to try to protect them from those cuts, because, like, this is real and this is happening next Friday. So that's my long-winded do better moment.
So I think my most valuable moment, I mean, there are many reasons that our district should be thankful for Senior Officer Giab, right? But last night, Student Representative Wesson asked a question about how does this budget situation impact students, and what does that mean? And what I appreciated, I hate spreadsheets. I don't enjoy talking about finances and money, but I do when Senior Officer Giab just pulled back and he said, here's what you need to know. And he explained to this young man exactly how finances in our district work on a very small scale. And I got it, right? Like, and so to me, that was the opposite of my do better moment, is that communication. That, like, when someone understands a problem, and and you're communicating with them in the way which, like, they have a fuller picture, now you've taught. And I thought that was just, like, incredible, um, fun to watch, and it was helpful for me. It was very helpful for me. What about you? What was your most valuable moment?
So my most valuable moment was the conversation that the district, or that Director Cerrillo started with Senior Officer Giap as well, um, about the cost structure being unsustainable. I think, we keep saying statements like that, but I don't think we always understand what those broad statements were, and I think that gets in the way of some of the communication things that you're talking about. So I just want to shout out the fact that that question was asked, and that we went in a little deeper into why this cost structure for Minneapolis public schools is unsustainable, because of our declining enrollment, and because, we have inflation that's skyrocketed over the last few years, right? Like, there are so many things that contribute to it, but it was just nice to understand it. And understand like our revenue's not matching our expenses, and we
Yeah.
have to figure out a way to make this a more sustainable source of income and a more sustainable plan for spending. So that was my most valuable moment. So thank you all so much for listening today. I hope you followed along, and I hope you check out our next coming couple videos, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.